Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Issaquah City Council Planning, Development, and Environment Committee meeting of Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. I am here this evening with Council President Walsh and Councilmember Hall, and I am the chair, Councilmember Hunt. We have multiple opportunities for public comment in this meeting this evening. We will have a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, and we will also have a public comment opportunity after our agenda item, and we have one regular business agenda item this evening. Do we have any members of the public that are signed up for a general public comment opportunity this evening? City Clerk?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Well, I will read some guidance for our audience comments. Public comments are an important part of the public process. We take them very seriously and factor them into the decisions we make. During audience comments, members of the public are invited to address the council regarding matters that are directly related to city programs, projects, services, or events, except for public hearing items, quasi-judicial items, and campaign-related matters. When you are recognized, please direct comments to our whole committee here. And while this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, please unmute your microphone, and there is a microphone up at the front here. And for virtual attendees, please unmute your microphone remotely. And please state your name, address, and relationship to the city. Please speak clearly and pause frequently, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. If you're attending virtually and do not respond after your name or phone number is called or your connection is lost, the meeting will proceed, and you are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if you are able. Written comments can be submitted at any time to citycouncil@issaquah.gov. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior are not permitted. With that, I will ask if the city clerk could please call up our first public comment.
Chair Hunt, Connie Marsh expressed the desire to address the committee.
Thank you. Welcome, Connie.
Hi, my name's Connie Marsh, and you've got a lot of information from me. This is the higher level bit where I talk about process and how information is supposed to go through the system and include council or not. So in this situation, we just completed a comprehensive plan that created a new series of policies, which I sent you all because I need to hunt them down so I could review them. And what council is supposed to do is council is supposed to ensure that the implementation that they are seeing is in line with the policies that they created. They're not supposed to be creating new policies at this point in time because we just did that. So when looking at the tasks in front of you, it is, okay, does this adhere to our council guidance that we created in the comprehensive plan? And then you go, okay, well, what does the community think about the particular topics? And so we present an agenda item, and it flows through the process, which in this case had some early overarching outreach to the public, which didn't talk about, do we actually want increased density? It only said, what do you think about a spectrum? And then, you know, you have some conversations, and a package eventually gets back to Planning Policy Commission that is supposed to already be within our comprehensive plan guidance, right? I'm not sure why this is coming to you all again, and I'm not sure why there was such a direct direction from this group back in November that was not really supported by our comprehensive plan, though that comp plan had been voted on at that point in time. But now we're here again, and you're looking at potentially creating direction to give back to Planning Policy Commission, who is not supposed to be being directed by City Council at this point in time. They're supposed to be dealing with the public process and the community opinions on topics. So when someone with more authority goes back to a community board and says, well, this is our opinion in advance, that is chilling the conversation of that committee, because they're going, well, council has already made a decision. And so I would say that the tone and the type of direction needs to be set to not chill a community conversation, because these decisions are being made for our entire community. They are not personal things. They are, how do we make an awesome city for the people who live here? And so I don't think some of the direction from the last meeting adheres to comp plan, nor do I think that it is a holistic community conversation at this point in time, because there's been a substantive change in the conversation. And there you go that was comment number 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. City Clerk, who is our next speaker?
Chair Hunt, we had nobody else sign up to speak, and we have no online attendees at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We do have a number of members of the public in the audience this evening. Does anyone in the audience wish to speak on this general public comment opportunity before I close this section? There is one item, and it is COM 0086, which is Title 18 Middle Housing Regulations. There will be an opportunity after that item's presentation before our discussion to make another comment on that option. So with that, I think I will close public comments, seeing no members of the public that wish to comment at this time. Okay, and we will proceed to our next item of business. There are no minutes that need to be approved at this meeting. So we will move into COM 0086, Title 18 Middle Housing Regulations, and this will be presented by Valerie Porter, our Associate Planner. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you. Good evening. All right. Before I get started, I just want to let you all know that there were some changes made to the presentation that was provided in the packet. So if you're trying to follow along, there may be some changes. So I apologize in advance for any confusion. So the administration is seeking your direction for and we're proposing 3 questions. The first question is related to lot density. Should the lot requirement go beyond the state requirement of 2 dwelling units per 1 lot, or allow 4 dwelling units per 1 lot without the affordable housing requirement? The second question is related to ADU size. Should the ADU size be increased from 1,000 square feet to 1,250? And then the last question is asking if there's anything else PPC should evaluate or provide a recommendation on before it comes back to you for a formal recommendation. So before I get into the policy questions, I just want to recap what some of the topics that we were discussed at the last meeting. We covered a lot. So I did pose about 6 questions. And so the first question was asking, how should the city define middle housing? You all agreed with the Planning Policy Commission and felt like that cap for middle housing should be 4. So middle housing is defined multi-unit projects between 2 and 4 units. And multifamily is 5+ units. With House Bill 1110, middle housing projects cannot be more restrictive than single family projects. And so the committee agreed that middle housing projects should be exempt from obtaining a land use permit similar to single family homes. And they should also be exempt from providing or constructing frontage improvements. With the middle housing regulations, there is an exemption for lots that are impacted by critical areas. And so I did pose that question on whether or not we should exempt those lots. And the committee agreed that we should continue to allow those lots who can develop to develop, but apply the code, the critical area code, how it is today. We also talked about accessory dwelling units. The city had the ability to determine how ADUs would be counted towards lot density, whether ADUs should just be outright allowed, or should they count towards the max, the lot density, just as long as that lot is complying with that max requirement. The committee sounds like agreed that ADUs should be counted towards lot density. And the last question that I posed was around impact fees. and whether impact fees should continue to be waived as they are today, and the committee agreed that they should. Again, we had a lot of discussion, and so some additional requests for information came out of the last meeting. The first one was regarding parking, and the second one was, again, this request to understand the pros and cons of increasing lot density. There was also a request for additional discussion around affordable housing. And then during the public comment, there was a request to increase the ADU size from 1,000 to 1,250. And you guys wanted to understand the pros and cons of increasing the size of the ADUs. And then you also requested staff to compile a list of barriers that are preventing middle housing. So before, again, we get into the policy questions, I just want to touch on two topics. One, the request for additional parking and affordable housing. The administration purposely did not provide affordable housing and parking policy questions. The first reason for that was because in 2003 we updated Title 18, and so the parking code has been updated and is in alignment for the most part with state regulations. We will be making some minor tweaks to it, but we feel like we don't need to make any major changes. The second reason is that last year the administration initially proposed to conduct two studies, one for parking and the second for inclusionary zoning. However, due to budget issues, those studies projects had to be cut. The administration believes that thoughtful consideration and analysis is needed for these topics, and so once we have the funding, we will bring back policy questions once we've done some analysis. So the first question that I'm posing tonight is, should lot density be increased beyond state's requirement of 2 dwelling units on one lot, or allow 4 dwelling units on one lot without the affordable housing requirement? So again, a reminder, House Bill 1110 determines lot density by a city's population. Issaquah falls into Tier 2, and so we're required to allow 2 dwelling units on one lot, with the exception if a lot is within a quarter-mile walking distance of a major transit stop. We're required to allow 4 units on one lot, and 4 units on one lot if one of those units has been set aside as an affordable housing unit. So if a property owner wanted to construct middle housing on their lot, they have a few building housing type options. They can construct a duplex, triplex, fourplex, townhome, stacked flats, or cottage housing. So here's a map of the city showing all Sound Transit bus stops, which the state defines as major transit stops. This map has changed from the last time you've seen it, and you'll notice that there are additional stops on this map. The reason for this change is that, one, the administration wanted to understand how the state was defining major transit stop, because as you can see, this has very big implications. So the administration does not agree with how the state is defining major transit stops. They are treating express bus stops like a transit center. And it's also important to note, again, all of these lots that are within these bubbles are not required to provide parking. So you're having lots that have increased density that are not intended, or that the city did not intend to have increased density, and they're not required to provide parking. The administration is very concerned about this, and especially, again, for those areas, but those areas that do not have on-street parking. And so if the developer chooses not to construct a parking on site, and there's no on-street parking option, where the car is going to go. The administration is presenting this information because we feel that it's a concern and we want to bring it to your attention. So based off the last conversation that we had regarding middle housing, we define middle housing as 4 units, 2 to 4 units, and so that streamlined the permitting process. So those projects are only required to obtain a building permit. Lots 5 to 10 are required to obtain a land use permit, but it's reviewed administratively, so the decision maker would be the CPD director. Projects with 11 units or more would still have to obtain a land use permit. They would have to hold a public hearing, and they would have to receive a decision from the Development Commission prior to construction. At the committee's request, the administration explored 2 options related to density. The administration recommends option 1, which is to comply with state requirements and allow 2 dwelling units on 1 lot or 4 dwelling units on 1 lot if within close to a major transit stop, or if 1 affordable unit has been provided. If this option were to be adopted, the city would likely see an increase in accessory dwelling units because 1, accessory dwelling units are less costly to construct compared to primary units, and House Bill 1337 supersedes House Bill 1110. And so instead of someone being allowed to have 2 units on a lot, they would be allowed to then construct 3. Also, developers have a hard time penciling out a project if there's an affordable housing unit, so likely the affordable housing requirement may deter some people from constructing that 4th unit. However, if they are able to construct it, then we do get additional affordable housing units for the city. The second option is to explore 4 units on 1 lot without the affordability requirement, so just outright allowing 4 units on 1 lot. Now, that doesn't mean that if a lot is within a major transit stop, they have to provide. They do have to provide parking. They still are not required to provide parking on site. So the pro of this this option would be we do get more housing. The con, however, would be without an affordable housing requirement, the likelihood of us getting affordable housing is pretty slim. Also, this option doesn't align with the city's comprehensive plans, goals, and policies of encouraging and promoting affordable housing. And the increase in density is seen as an incentive. So if the city wanted to treat the additional density as an incentive and maybe come back and decide, well, we do want to apply this affordability requirement later, we couldn't do that after we adopt these regulations. We would have to come up with another incentive, say reduce parking for some lots. And last, a lot of the lots are not able to, a lot of the single family lots are not able to accommodate 4 units along with the associated infrastructure, driveway, parking, utilities, walkways. So to kind of expand on this, this point, I would like to present a couple of case studies. But before I do that, I want to kind of explain buildable area. Buildable area is determined by zoning standards. So that's 1, your building height, which is, again, the height of the building. Building setbacks, which is the distance from your property line to the face of your building. And then 3rd, your lot coverage, which is how much of the lot is covered by impervious surface. On this image, you'll see a dotted line behind, around the building. The dotted line is the buildable area. So the first case study I'm going to show is a lot that's located within the single-family duplex area. So these are actual lots. We're not showing exactly where, but we wanted you to get a flavor for what, have something realistic. So it's also worth noting that all of the case studies, except for 1, are showing lots with existing homes, as we believe, again, ADUs are most likely going to be created other than demoing the home and building new structures. And so for the first one, it's single-family duplex. So single-family duplex has a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet, and the lot may not cover more than 50% of that lot. The front setback is 10, the side setbacks are 6, and the rear setbacks are 10. Excuse me. As you can see with this first case study, there's a primary home and with the addition of 2 attached ADUs. The additions are in orange, and you can see that this 6,000 square foot lot is pretty crunched for space with a primary home, a 450 square foot ADU that's over the existing garage, and a 1,000 square foot attached ADU along with the parking and walkways. So based off the zoning standards, this lot would not be able to accommodate a fourth unit or a fourth detached unit, as this lot is already at max capacity for lot coverage.
Do you prefer that we hold our questions until the end, or should we ask questions?
You can ask questions if it helps.
Okay. So for this example, this is under current code that it would not accommodate, and under the proposed code change as well. Under
Correct.
both circumstances, this would not allow for 4 units.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then also, just to clarify, these examples are all assuming no critical area impacts or anything, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
All right. Okay, the next few case studies are going to be located within the single-family suburban area. And so this zone has a minimum lot size of 9,600 square feet. The lots cannot go over a 40% lot coverage. The front setback is 20 feet, the side setbacks are 8, and the rear setbacks are 10. So for this first lot, this is a primary home with a garage conversion. So they had an existing garage, they converted it to an ADU, and then they constructed a detached ADU. So this is a 12,000 square foot lot. The proposal, again, cannot exceed 40 square feet, 40% of the lot, and so that's 4,800 square feet. And so this proposal is actually covering close to 32%. Again, creating a fourth unit is doable because this lot has a little bit more space, but you can see it's going to be a challenge. You're going to have to get creative with your design in order to get a detached unit, a walkway, and another parking stall on the lot. There was also a request to kind of speak to unit lot subdivisions. And for a lot like this, if someone wanted to come in and create a second lot, they could do that by utilizing the unit lot subdivision provisions, which basically allows someone to create a new lot, but the zoning standards that we're talking about, the lot size or setbacks, would not apply to the individual lots, but to the parent lots before it was subdivided. So if someone had the ability to do 4 units on the lot, they could do that and have 0 lot lines, basically having the lot line down the wall. So we added this in our code last year with the Title 18 update. The next case study is showing a primary home, again, a garage conversion and an attached ADU on the backside. Again, this lot cannot exceed 40% of the lot coverage and is currently at 30. So again, there's a little bit more wiggle room, but having a fourth detached structure on this lot will be a challenge, in addition to having parking, utilities, and all the other supported infrastructure. So here is a lot that's over 15,000 square feet. The max lot coverage is a little bit over 6,200. And this proposal is showing 4 detached cottages, so 2 at 1,600 square feet and 2 at 1,000 square feet. The lot is also providing the required parking for each lot, so 4 parking stalls. This lot coverage is 36, and again, the max is 40. It's also worth mentioning with cottage housing, there's going to be a open space, like a central plaza requirement, which is why there's so much space. So for those who are like, well, just build in the middle, no, you can't. There's going to be an open space requirement. So again, the first question is, should lot density be increased beyond the state's requirement of two dwelling units on 1 lot, or allow 4 dwelling units on 1 lot without the affordable housing requirement? The second question that I'm going to pose tonight is, should the maximum size of the ADU be increased from 1,000 square feet to 1,250? So accessory dwelling units are intended to be subordinate. They're meant to supplement the primary unit, so they're meant to be small, independent living spaces. So to understand the size of the unit, I thought it'd be a good idea for you to see the layout of some units, so you can understand what does 1,000 square feet get you, what does 1,250 get you. So I have the following are layouts of apartments, but they're comparable because, again, they show independent living. The first is of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath unit located within the Discovery Heights development. As you can see, this development has 3 bedrooms, varying size, but pretty decent. You also get 2 full baths, a living, a kitchen area, and a dining area. And the square footage on this one is 1,297. I know that's a little bit over what we, the proposal, but I think you kind of get the idea of that this is more 3-bedroom. The second layout is of a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment in the Revel Issaquah apartment. And, excuse me, again, you get 2 bedrooms. The main bedroom is a little bit over 200 square feet, and the second bedroom is a little bit over 100 square feet. You get 2 full bath, a living and a kitchen. The third unit is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, which is 866 square feet. Again, it's pretty sizable units, 1 full bath, a living and a kitchen area. And then the last is, again, part of the Revel Issaquah development, and that's 1-bedroom, 1-bath, which is 831 square feet. And the bedroom is about 150 square feet. So you can see that the 1,000 square foot requirement was based off of a 2-bedroom layout, which seems to be more comparable to an accessory versus the primary. So if the size of the ADUs were to increase, this could be a more of a housing option for a larger demographic, say like a smaller home. But also increasing the size of the ADUs will also encourage, more development, but then you start to possibly see developers treat primary units like ADUs because they start to get comparable in size. So if you again remember the cottage development, there was 2 1,000 square foot units and 2 1,600 square foot units. So if someone were to come in, they could say, well, not in that case exactly, because again, they have a affordability or a open space requirement, but a similar project, they could come in and say, I have, instead of 4 primary units, 2 units and 2 ADUs. And so the 2 units would be not required to have impact fees. So it's always good to understand what other cities are doing. However, a lot of the other cities are in the same boat that we are, and so some of these regulations are subject to change come June. But if we are a Tier 2 city, so we're similar to Redmond, Sammamish, Shoreline, Bothell, and Linwood, and as you can see, the dimensions are all over. It's from 800 square feet to 1,500 square feet. So, but we are closer to Sammamish, which is our neighboring city. So again, the second question is, should the maximum size of the ADU be increased from 1,000 square feet to 1,250 square feet? So again, there was a request to understand what barriers. Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, so in the memo, there's something too about how the administration was maybe proposing something around 25%, like ADUs, 25% less size than the primary structure.
Correct.
Expand on that.
So, to try to avoid folks coming in saying that, oh, we're proposing for primary, but really they're 2 ADUs, we would impose a requirement that states that the ADUs have to be 25% less than the primary unit. So again, to try to make sure that the ADUs are smaller. We would also try to address the fact that, a property owner just maybe has a basement and they want to, convert it for an elderly parent. So we would then say, whatever the size of that basement would be allowed, just as long as you don't expand the building footprint. Okay, so there was a request from for staff to create a list of barriers. And so these are a list of barriers that are covered in the municipal code. So the first barrier is the critical areas. A large portion of the city is impacted by critical areas, and this does impact developable areas. However, there isn't much that we can do with this. The critical areas are where they are. We just need to make sure that we're not impacting those critical areas. Another barrier, like I presented with the case studies, are as the zoning standards, as it does impact buildable area. However, the administration is not proposing to make any changes at this time. Another barrier are utilities. Constructing utilities is a significant cost. Just, I think, creating a meter, not my area of expertise, but creating a connection could be between $20,000 to $40,000. So that is a significant impact. And then also some developers have said impact fees are high. So again, the administration is seeking direction on lot density, the size of the accessory dwelling units, and then we also want to understand, prior to PPC making a formal recommendation on proposed code amendments, is there anything else PPC should evaluate and provide a recommendation on? And at this time, I will take questions.
Thank you so much. All right, we will move into committee questions. Council President Walsh.
Thank you. So looking over those examples, it seems like the biggest piece, the biggest barrier to future development is the impervious surface lot coverage. So can you explain a little bit about why the administration isn't looking to address that and the impacts that it has on things like water recharge and other areas that would make it a more complex conversation?
Yeah, like you said, it has ripple effects and impacts stormwater. So we would have to have stormwater infrastructure in places at certain areas. And every zone is different. Like there's parking or critical recharge areas in some zones, but not in others. And so it just requires a little bit more time than we can dedicate, because again, we have this requirement of June 2025 that we're up against.
And then you mentioned as a con that if the lot is small enough or has an impervious surface requirement that, you know, only 3 or only 2 units would be built. What do you mean by con on that? I see that as more of a like regulation requirement that just says this lot might only allow 2, that lot might allow 4. This lot, much like the critical areas, might only allow 2. So was that a con, or how do you?
It's a con in the context. If your con is your goal, if it's a con if your goal is to increase lot density to 4 because you can't get that 4th unit. But like you said, the zoning standards are doing what they're doing, which is keeping the development sizable and to the appropriate scale.
All right. I do have a couple questions. Would you be able to go back to the slide with the proposed 4-unit option and the alternative? Thank you. It had side-by-side comparison, I believe.
It was a side by side. Oh, of the different options?
Yes.
This guy?
Yes. Okay. So the proposed, when you were walking through the different examples, those were you were speaking to what would be allowed under current code and then what was under the proposed code, and the proposed code is what is recommended by the administration at this time. Is that all correct?
So the zoning standards are what they are today. Again, we're not changing them. The last example of the cottage house, well, all of the examples would not be allowed today because today you're only allowed one ADU. So it's applying the current standards with this new regulation.
Okay, and the word proposed, that is the administration's proposed choice for the 4-unit option.
Oh, the administration is recommending option 1, aligning with state requirements.
Okay. So the wording proposed, what does that indicate in this context then?
Oh, we're exploring option,
Another option.
The 4 units on 1 lot. That's
Okay.
why it's proposed. It's not an actual requirement.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So when you were looking at moving on to the ADU size options, when you were talking about Revel, I just wanted to clarify that is an independent senior living housing that is in Issaquah currently, correct? Okay.
Yes.
I just mentioned that because one of our reasons for exploring this was we did hear from folks that wanted to have support for seniors within an ADU, and that our current requirements did not allow for that. So the 2-bedroom units are interesting in that context. And then, okay, one more question on the ADUs. You mentioned that in your comments, I think you said that ADUs are more likely to be built rather than demolishing an existing single-family home and building 2 units. I believe that in our last discussion on this topic, you also spoke to the number of ADUs that have been built outside of development units and outside of development agreements, and that it's quite small. So I wondered if you could give us a quick overview of that. I believe it's a low number of folks that have used the current regulations to build ADUs, which has been in place for a number of years. I wonder if you could go over that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't remember off the top of my head. I believe Stephen was able to assist me with that. I know he's online. I'm going to put him on the spot and see if he can provide that information again for us.
Good evening, everyone. Stephen Padua, Assistant Planning Director with CPD. So I'm looking through my notes on last time because I don't have the number off the top of my head. If you can give me a minute, I can help answer that question.
Okay.
I just looked it up if it's helpful.
That's great.
82 is what was listed in the housing report card. There have been a total of 82 built across the city.
Okay. And those are
Yeah.
including development agreement.
Oh, that's true. That's including development agreements. Good point. Yeah.
So. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes. If Stephen, if you are able to find the number that are developed after we adopted those regulations, which were intended to incentivize or make it easier for folks to choose that option to develop ADUs, that would also be helpful. Those are my questions at this time. Councilmember Hall.
Well, thank you very much for answering some of my kind of clarifying questions over email. I appreciate that. And I think that this kind of exercise of pros and cons has also been really helpful in kind of understanding and chewing on these policy issues a little bit, and will be helpful to PPC as they chew on it as well. I think the administration's made really compelling points. I just keep coming back to one question, and maybe it's more of a policy question for us to chew on, but I'd be curious if the administration has any thoughts about how we should be thinking about the concern around infrastructure impacts and timing. That, you know, when these bills were passed in the state, there was a lot of worry that things like infill would happen overnight, which obviously isn't going to happen. It's going to be many, many years, decades sometimes. So how should we really be thinking about the concern around infrastructure improvements when over time these things will kind of be happening on their own as infill starts to come up very slowly in neighborhoods. If you have any thoughts, anyone on staff, if not, maybe it's something we should just chew on.
Good evening, committee members. It's a good point. I think as the city looks at sewer plans, water plans, all of that, we'll factor that in terms of a certain percentage. What the market will deliver is still, you don't want to plan for 100%. Everyone will put in 2 units, and therefore we need to upsize our sewer line by thousands of, millions of dollars. And so obviously that will be a very balanced approach of what we see the market delivering, how much we think is going to come. We did some of that exercise with the EIS for the comprehensive plan, because we did assume some growth outside of certain areas in response to these 2 House bills. But again, we were picking a number. Now, with time and market and forces, we'll learn more about how soon it happens. But you're absolutely right; it's not going to happen overnight. Some of the states that have done similar legislation and implementation, it's the results of they point to anything. It's slow, but over a long period of time, we'll just have to keep at it through the comprehensive planning process. It's no right answer at this point.
I think I have another question, not a follow-up. Thank you. That was excellent. Chair Hunt, you had brought this up too, how the ADU, and actually I think you brought up the last committee meeting, like we had wanted to explore what it would look like, the pros and cons to increase the size for ADUs, because we had heard this call for people wanting in-home care and having an in-home care provider to live inside with someone who's aging in place. Now you had the example of kind of like a basement, like that could be one of the ways that we're flexible, and then the proposal of having it 25% less than the primary structure. I guess keeping it at 1,000 square feet, it seemed like there was a pretty, the gentleman who came and talked to us said that just wouldn't be possible to have the space that was necessary for people who are aging in place and in home care and whatever kind of services or structure that they need inside the home. How do we avoid some of the challenges between differentiating between primary structures and ADUs that you've highlighted pretty well, but also provide flexibility for this option for aging in place in our community? I guess I'm also just curious on your thoughts on that, because that's kind of the primary thing I keep going back to is you've made very compelling points for why maybe 1,000 square feet is the right number or something around there. But if that's not going to work for the market, for people to be able to stay in place and have in-home care living inside, I'd like to explore how we create kind of flexibility in code for that. And maybe the question is that something PPC should chew on further? But if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear it as well.
As a current planner, I haven't heard very many people saying that the 1,000 square feet requirement is hindering them from doing whatever, or for creating an additional unit for elderly parent or for their kids that come back from college where they just need a little bit of space. So, but in the case for the I think it was the caretaker, there is a requirement that if you have a group of disabled folks, you must have a space for the caretaker. Now, there are no requirements regarding, what that space, the size of that space should be. It's just saying that you must provide one. So I think, I don't want to speak for that person, but it could be on what they think a caretaker would want, or to make it appealing for them to take that job. So, you have your own unit as you're caring for someone else. So I don't know if I've spoken to your question or not.
Well, a little bit, and it's definitely helpful to understand kind of what are the use cases that you're hearing about for ADUs, and is 1,000 square feet hindering that or not. So it sounds like maybe that's not something, at least right now in this moment, that is a problem that's showing up in the community.
Yeah, I haven't heard a large number. Now, again, you'll always have a couple of people who want a little bit more space, but for the number of, folks that call or projects that we've seen, that hasn't deterred people from creating.
Do we have any other questions at this time? Okay. All right. I think at this time then, there being no questions at this time, we will move into our public comment opportunity. And so these will be comments that are specifically on the Title 18 Middle Housing Regulations, COM 0086. The same guidance that I read at the beginning of the meeting does apply to this opportunity. So I will check in with the city clerk if there are any members of the community that would like to speak on this item.
Well, Chair Hunt, there's no online attendees, but I'm certain we have folks in the room. Nobody has signed up.
All right. Okay, nobody has signed up though on the second item. All right.
We don't have sign up for that.
Thank you. Are there any members of the community in council chambers that would like to speak on this item? See one hand, two hands. If you could please approach the podium and give your name, address, relationships to the city, and your comments. Thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. I'm Mark. I'm an Issaquah resident, and I just want clarification. Is the current setting that you can add one ADU, and they want to increase it to 2 or larger? Is that the understanding? Okay. And also, what are the definitions of primary versus ADU? Is it, because you're saying it can't be larger than the primary, is it what's existing and what's being built, or is it the owner where they live? I'm just looking for clarification.
At this time, we do not do question and answer, but you're welcome to give your comments on any of the items, and then council can discuss the options that were before us, but we don't do question and answer at this point. This is for public comments.
Apologies.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other members of the community that would like to speak? Yes, please approach the podium. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kim Enfinger. My address is 365 Southeast Bush, Old Town, so I'm an property owner, and I wanted to, just for the record, to speak in opposition of increasing the lot density for Old Town, specifically beyond the state's requirement, but in support of increasing the maximum size of ADUs from 1,000 to 1,250.
Thank you very much. We do have a number of other folks in the council chambers. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Connie, welcome.
All right, Connie Marsh again. So in reading the comprehensive plan, it says we want a pedestrian-oriented town, so all infill development will enhance the pedestrian movement and mobility. So when you go back to the assumption from the last meeting that 2 units or 4 units even would not have to do frontage improvements, basically that is not creating a sidewalk. And so if our comprehensive plan says that that is the case, the question really should be, should one house do frontage improvements, because that's what our comp plan policy says, not should we exempt the other houses from having to do it, because we're trying to make a walkable city. It's everywhere. The other thing is we are supposed to be putting our density where we have transit and mobility. And in this situation, our central Issaquah plan is the place that actually has transit and the majority of the sidewalks. Issaquah Highlands has that built in. Calais, for example, does not. Squawk does not. Then it says, we are supposed to try to put our density in places that is most easily, efficiently, effectively, it changes its words, served by its utilities and infrastructure. So if you say, and I believe that the state was foolish in saying that you should put 2, if you decide that you want to spread this density out, 2, but worse 4, in far-fetched places within this city, even over time, you are going to be looking, when we don't have the budget to even do what we have to do and we're firing people now, and we don't see a pathway to more income, you're going to have to figure out how to pay. And if you're exempting the impact fees for your ADUs and potentially for your other things, you are not getting the money. And the people who are having to pay are the people who live here already, and you're increasing their costs to have to live in the city of Issaquah, which goes against the comprehensive plan saying that we're supposed to be creating affordable housing. It doesn't really talk about the affordability of the housing, but I expect the people are going to say enough about the affordability of their housing. So, last point, the comprehensive plan also says that near term, within the next year, that the city is supposed to be going out to these neighborhoods that we are discussing and asking them what they would like to see in their neighborhoods. What is the appropriate density? What are the amenities that they would like to see? What is the nature and the sensibility of their communities that they want to maintain? And after this conversation, and after you get that public input, it is then the time to see if these neighborhoods would like to have higher density because that is what they see as their future. The conversation in a subcommittee meeting is leaving out the community that you are to be representing when the comprehensive plan has already outlined the pathway to represent that very community. So I would ask that you stick with the mandated state law, chafe against it, but certainly wait until the community has its chance to say what its home, what's its heart and its lives should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the community? Yes, please approach the podium. Thank you.
Good evening. Chris Richley, 2616 20th Avenue Northeast, Issaquah, up in the Highlands. First of all, thank you guys for your work on this. Having worked on the strategic plan task force and the comprehensive plan update and the economic development plan update, one thing that comes to mind to me when I look at this initiative is the affordable housing piece of it. And it does specifically state in the strategic plan that we are to create an affordable housing plan. And that's what I would encourage when you look at this type of initiative, that we keep that in front of our minds as far as the affordability piece of it. Because we want to be able to create, when you look at small businesses, the workforce wants to be able to work here and live here like I do. I live and work and play in Issaquah. I have that privilege, but do our workers, do our police department, do our fire departments, do our doctors and everybody that works in the area, they travel in. So I'm in favor of increasing the size or whatever. The plan is meant to create that diversity of housing to allow for that middle market that's not there. But I would also keep the affordability piece of it in front of mine as far as whether it's higher, the rent. I would keep that affordable piece in there because it's going to be, a lot of them are going to be rentals. I highly doubt they're going to be ownership. So the affordability piece needs to be in that. Whatever you decide, I would hope it would continue to be affordable. That is part of the strategic plan, and the comprehensive plan is the affordability piece of it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Checking last call. If there are any other members of the community and council chambers that would like to make comments on this item before we move into our council committee deliberation. Okay, not seeing any. All right, we do have 3 questions that are posed by the administration. I'm wondering if you could put those questions up on the screen so we can have them. I actually think if the committee is amenable, maybe we can go to the ADU one first. I think that might be easier to resolve first because it's a specific question, and then we can do the question, the first question, and then the third question, which is regarding extra additional items to send to PPC. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair Hunt. So I do have an answer to your question on the number of ADUs that have been built.
Excellent.
The ADU code was adopted back in 2018, and 29 ADUs have been built since that time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, are we okay with discussing item 2, then 1, then 3? Okay. Would anyone like to kick us off on item 2?
Can I ask a couple follow-up questions really quickly based on
yes.
what came up in public comment?
Yes.
So there was a question around size of primary unit and ADU. I was wondering if you could kind of speak to kind of differences in primary unit and ADU.
The code doesn't specify a specific size for the primary unit. We just specify a size for the AD unit. So an ADU, a primary unit could be 800 square feet, could be 2,500 square feet. Just depends on whoever's developing it.
Right, and the needs and whatever the market's driving for size of housing. Okay.
Correct.
And then there was another question about, and you had answered this in an email response to me, but about how we ensure affordability of that 4th unit. Can you also speak to kind of the affordability aspect of that?
Yes. So with the state legislation, we are required to have rental units rented to households 60% of the AMI. And then for owner-occupied units, we're required to sell those to households that are 80%, AMI is area medium income. And how that works is the developer, whoever is, setting aside that unit as affordable, they're required to record a covenant that runs with the land. And the city, along with the Regional Coalition of Housing, our planning, our affordable housing partners would track that covenant.
Did you have any additional questions, Councilmember Hall? Okay. All right. Thank you. Would you like to make comments on this item at this time? Okay. Thank you.
I think, by the way, I thought some of the comments about process earlier were well taken. Are you looking for kind of definitive direction, or again, is this more kind of what is the head of temperature of PDE as we then go to PPC again, because they've already had one that's then coming back with some of these issues. Is that right? Really more thinking of it as not definitive direction. Okay.
Can I make an additional clarification? I was formerly Planning Policy Commission, as was Council President Walsh. Another factor here is that PBC, if they have a public hearing and they have discussed those options, that gives the public at that public hearing an option to have known that this is something we're considering. So that's another reason that we might direct them to that this is our preference, so that is something that's considered in their public hearing, and that the public knows that this is the direction that we're headed.
Yeah, so then I guess for the second question around ADUs, definitely in the last meeting I would have said I don't necessarily see what the downsides would have been with increasing the size to 1250, but I find myself questioning that logic now. I feel like you've laid out a lot of challenges around staff not being able to understand differences or interpret differences between primary structures and ADUs at a certain point, and so we want to avoid that. There were some challenges associated with even utilities that you had brought up as well. So my initial gut reaction would say we maintain the maximum size of ADUs at 1,000 square feet, but continue to monitor what the use cases are for ADUs as hopefully they continue to start to creep up from, what is it, 29 units since, what did Stephen say? Some year, 2018? Oh, that's even worse. So I guess my initial reaction would be let's stick with 1,000 square feet and monitor what the interested use cases are for ADUs. If we need to go in and make changes again, I'm sure that's something we can do at a later date. But I would also be interested if PPC has any thoughts around how could we potentially create flexibility in code to allow for use cases that align with our other strategic planning documents like Human Services Strategic Plan and thinking about how we're creating spaces for people at all stages of their life to live in place, to live in the community that they love. So that's not super helpful direction, but if they have any thoughts, if staff have any thoughts, perhaps this is something other cities have also considered. It seemed like for ADU size, it was all over the place in the region. So maybe there are also, maybe it's also all over the place in terms of what are kind of flexibility in code, or is there administrative deviances that exist elsewhere in other cities that might be worth looking into. Those are kind of my initial thoughts on that second policy question.
Council President Walsh.
Thanks. Yeah, really here I'm looking to explore some of the ideas and then send it back to PPC to have conversations. I don't think there's any reason to give them direction, just make sure that they can consider different options here. So some of the questions there. So for me, some of the stuff in responding to number 2 is about prior to PPC making a formal recommendation, is there anything they should evaluate? So when considering ADUs, what I'd like to know is, particularly with someone who is in a disabled situation that needs larger walkways, doorways, etc., how much does that impact square footage? And like, you've done a great job of providing examples that are around 1,000 square feet, but I believe the example that someone had brought to us with an ADU for senior care situation, they said that at least their agency required a separate bathroom for the person. So it would have to be a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And if we're looking at doorways that had to be wider, how does that impact? And then toward this idea of flexibility or administrative deviances, what are our options there? So one particular area that I want to look at is, in that case, somebody with a disability who needs wider walkways. The second thing that I want to consider when we're talking about ADUs is that percentage of the main unit. Does PPC have a preference on saying the ADU shouldn't be no more than 75%? Or 1,000 square feet, whichever is higher? What is the thought process there? And then the third piece for me in considering ADUs is I really don't want people to try and work around that just to avoid the impact fees. So considering, those trade-offs, I'd like PPC to have a conversation if they feel like having a larger unit is worth it to have that additional supply of housing versus the downside of us not receiving the impact fees. So I think having an intentional conversation about that pro and con, I think would be really beneficial. Again, on this one, I don't have a dog in the race. I'd like to hear from the community, and then I'd like PPC to have a really good conversation on that. I think given the information we have, it makes sense to go up to 1,250. But I see the pros and cons, so I'd like to hear from PPC.
Okay, thank you. I think, so I was in the conversations in around around 6 years ago now, when we were talking about this in 2018, and we really were trying to adopt regulations that would make it possible and simpler for folks in our community, community members, to decide with their property to build an ADU and to use that for, potentially for a family member, for a senior to age in place, for a adult child to return to the home. I mean, there were many compelling reasons why the community would benefit from having this as an option. And since then, we've seen 29 be built. So I think giving some additional flexibility, I think it's unlikely to be, it's definitely not going to solve our housing problems. But at the same time, I think it might give some more flexibility for somebody who needs a little more than 1,000 square feet because they have a need for a caregiver. And we saw, I think, compelling evidence that for the Rebel apartments, which is senior independent living, for the 2-bedroom, it's a little bit bigger than 1,000 square feet. And so, between that and then also recalling all of the conversations we had about perhaps you have a house where you want to make the lower floor or the daylit basement, which is a kind of development that we have throughout Issaquah, that might be an ADU, that might be a little bit more than 1,000 square feet. And so I think for me, this is a little bit more flexibility for homeowners. This is something that we have wanted to allow and to incentivize and to promote ADUs for years. And we've seen 29 built since our last attempt at this. So my take is that we should give more flexibility. I'm okay with these other, making sure that's 75% of the house. I do think that complicates things, and I'm for streamlining it because I think that more complex means more requirements, and that can also be something that's a complication for a homeowner who's just trying to assess if this is something that's possible. At the same time, I think, bottom line, I would like to give more flexibility to homeowners because we have not seen this option be taken up, and it is something that is in our housing policy from, before I was on council, our housing strategy plan, that we wanted to allow for this kind of housing. It fits into our neighborhoods. It's something that existing homeowners have wanted to do, and there's a lot of folks that would benefit from that. So that's my take on number 2. Okay. Should we move on to policy question number 1? Okay. Anybody like to kick us off on policy question 1? The President Walsh.
Thank you. So first, I just want to take a little step back to the previous meeting. My idea in suggesting that we consider 4 units was just that, a consideration. It wasn't we should tell PPC that should be the thing they consider. It's just like, let's not cut our legs off before we have a robust conversation. I think there's a lot of really great conversations about, the affordability and supply and all of those pieces. So I think I don't really have a lot of direction here other than, PPC went on a tour and saw some of the duplex, triplex, and quadplexes. Well, we only have one quadplex on that tour that fit into the neighborhood feel. I think you've highlighted on the maps that with the state requirement around 1/4 mile around transit stops, there's going to be a lot of areas that already have 4 units allowed without parking. So I think that's an important consideration, is that it's already going to happen in many cases because of state law. I think it's also really important to recognize that much like we didn't get houses torn down so that somebody could buy or build an ADU, or we haven't had a lot of ADUs built, very likely to have a lot of these built, and they're still going to be limited by critical area. They're still going to be limited by the lot coverage and impervious surface. They're still going to have parking requirements. And so I think the idea of considering that some lots might be appropriate to have 4 units on them, especially when you're looking at some of our estate lots or bigger areas that just have a lot of land, I would have a really hard time looking at that landowner and say, I'm sorry, because this was a scary idea, we didn't want to let you do something that would be absolutely appropriate. It's not going to happen on most lots. So I think I'm comfortable with looking at 4 dwelling units. The question I would want to have PPC look at is, can we potentially do like 5 or 6 units with an affordable housing requirement, and then have 4 be a max? If that's not possible, then I want to hear from them about, you know, the affordable housing and whether that is going to present, clarifying there very well. How do I say that? I might have to come back to the affordable housing portion. I guess my biggest piece is I just want to hear from PPC. I think that this should be an option that they consider, and that the important elements for making that decision are a lot about affordability, allowing more units on larger lots that would support it, and recognizing that we have a lot of other areas in the code that already have place limitations that will help out in that way. I'll come back to the affordable housing part.
I wanted to, if I may, I also wanted to clarify. So you made a comment about near transit centers or near transit, that there would already be housing that is the 4 units per lot. And you said without parking. I just want to clarify, without the requirements of parking, right? I mean, it's not without parking.
That's a good point, is that developers can build the parking however they want, whether it's on-site or on-street, and consider that parking. But could you clarify on the state requirement with around transit stops? Is the change that A, they can have 4 units, up to 4 units, and B, they don't have to build parking on site?
Correct. The city cannot allow them or require them to provide parking, but with the market, they could, you know, elect to have parking on site.
Just wanted to clarify one thing on the parking. So we're still looking at the definitions of this major transit stop, and it's complex. There's multiple places in state law that define it slightly differently. So we haven't quite figured that part out, but we will with the Planning and Policy Commission. But we wanted to highlight that this could be a potential thing. We just don't know at this point.
Okay, thank you. But in any event, it's not required. It does still exist in its current form, and it could be built. Okay. All right. I'm comfortable going. Or would you like to go? Okay. All right. I wanted to start my comments on this item with a few strategies and policies, and then anecdotes, and then my thoughts. So we have had a housing strategy work plan since 2017. And in that, we have a strategy, longstanding strategy, around incorporating code provisions to increase the diversity of housing types built in the city. And as part of that, we also have the statistic that data developed for the housing strategy work plan shows that 60% of all households in Issaquah are 1 or 2 person households. And that was 2017. From talking with folks across the city, there are a lot of folks that would like to downsize, that would like to have an option in the city for a smaller unit to live in, and are not able to find that in our city. So this continues to be a big challenge, I think, that we have 60% of all households in Issaquah are 1 or 2 person households. That dates back to 2017. I think it continues to be a challenge. Also for the workforce, just for folks that would like to have a smaller unit, they would like to have options. Allowing, it says in our strategy from 2017, allowing the market to build smaller forms of housing could address this need. And we have strategies around how we might allow for these smaller housing types in our different neighborhoods. So this is a conversation that we have been having for quite a while. I think it's quite well documented, and it is also something that we've had a lot of community feedback about. Also in our comprehensive plan, we discuss that to spur development, the city, this is a quote, to spur development, the city will allow the development of housing such as duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, stacked housing, and cottage housing where single family housing is allowed. And this is in a conversation in our comprehensive plan about, we do have capacity, but we are not seeing that kinds of housing being built that our community would really benefit from, and it would improve their quality of life. I was at a farmer's market earlier this year where we had a number of items listed for community feedback. You know, how do you feel about these different items? Very conversational. And a woman came up to me and she was speaking about how one of the challenges that she has faced is that in a domestic violence situation, if you're not able to find housing and you have children, you want to stay in your school district, that this had meant that she just didn't have options for moving and staying within her community. And so these restrictions, this lack of housing options that folks would like to have in our community, it is something that impacts folks. And when I reflect back also on our equity training, we don't always hear from people who are deeply impacted. This was a conversation at a farmer's market where we were talking with folks, and she shared that with me, that in a domestic violence situation, she wouldn't be able to move. So I wanted to share that because I think that these conversations, giving folks options, it is really important. I think there are many restrictions already in place that make sense about critical areas, protecting our natural environment, making sure that the lots fit, that there's enough space. You know, I think there's a lot of requirements in there already. I think that allowing for more flexibility would benefit our community. So I would be in favor, as Council President Walsh spoke to, I would be in favor of having Planning Policy Commission consider this additional flexibility. Right, Councilmember Hall?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Well, I mean, first, just ditto that I would also like to hear from Planning Policy Commission, and definitely eager to hear from their consideration. And it does seem like more and more community members are hearing about this and are writing in. We're getting lots of people writing in either for or against. So that's always a good thing when you have people communicating how they're feeling about particular issues. And some coming today. Thank you very much. I think my interest, so I had expressed my interest in exploring this 4-unit per lot idea back in November too, because wanting to try to understand how can we create flexibility for homeowners and really the market more generally to be able to decide what's best for their lot and not be so limiting. But I think that the arguments that the administration has made is really compelling, and I think that the state has actually created this pathway where someone could build 4 units as long as one of them is affordable, or depending on where they are, and it seems like we're still trying to work out where these major transit stops are, you could do 4 units as well. So meeting kind of the state's original intent around wanting infill, wanting density in these areas that aren't necessarily like our downtown core, but also meeting our own affordable housing goals, which of course, there's ADU, we're not seeing that happen a lot, but I mean, affordable housing as well is not something that we're seeing a whole lot of success in wanting to build as well. So anyways, I think kind of the staff recommendation of not exceeding state requirements here is compelling, and that way growth comes with this added community benefit of affordable housing. But honestly, I mean, all of this is a big change. So eager to hear what planning policy has to say, and what the community has to say in between now and whenever this comes back to council. Regardless of what we do, we also just need to make sure we have capacity to evaluate whether things are actually happening, and coming back to council and saying this is working the way it intended or this isn't working the way they intended. Maybe we stick with the state requirements and then try to understand how it's actually happening on the ground over time, and if we need to be flexible and move up to 4 or even higher, as Council President was referring to, either, that those can be future conversations that we have too. So that's just kind of like where I sit in this moment in time right now, is that maybe we stick with kind of the state requirements. I think the staff have made a good case for that.
Council President Walsh?
Thanks. So I think one of the things I could say off of this is it feels like there's a mix of conversations here. So I just want to make sure that PPC gets the questions that are coming at them and that really just recognizes that this is an important conversation to have and understand what the needs are of the community. You know, we've heard from many members of the community about their concerns around traffic and schools and, you know, neighborhood character and things like that. So I'd like to make sure that those things are specifically addressed and not coming from a standpoint of recognizing this is probably not all going to happen very quickly, not all in one neighborhood. And so addressing what an 11-unit plus place would have to do when it comes to like traffic studies versus what a single family would have to do, and kind of understanding the impact on a per lot basis, and what those pieces are. So I think that would be important in having the conversation. I think also I don't know, I'm just reflecting back. I've got 2 teenagers in high school, and one of them wants to be a preschool teacher, and just recognizing the dang good preschool teacher too, by the way. And that's such a need in the community. We've got so many people that are currently working in our small businesses and our healthcare and education. We've got, I mean, I don't think we have a single police officer, or maybe just a few that live in the city, because it's so unaffordable. And so I just really want to make sure that we keep that portion in mind when we're talking about PPC, when we're talking to PPC on that. And there's two, maybe if you can make sure you open with that continuum of housing and understanding that middle housing and additional housing create supply, which inherently helps with cost of living. I'm not saying it's going to bring things down, and some of the new units are going to be luxury units, but somebody that moves into that luxury unit that's created as somebody's ADU is moving out of another smaller, older unit that then becomes more affordable. Or they're moving in from Auburn, and so they're no longer driving that whole distance in order to work in Issaquah. So I guess I just want to make sure that we're infusing this with all of the other benefits that come from adding housing options in our community that serve members of the community as we talk through it all. So,
Thank you, Council President. That did remind me to also speak to one thing. There's existing housing, some of which is affordable. There's also affordable housing. We used to talk about capital A versus lowercase a affordable, right? There's housing that is more, relatively speaking, more affordable for folks. And then there is technically affordable housing that is, at 80% AMI, et cetera, technically maintained at a certain level of affordability based on the area median income. And I think that's all important, because what we've seen with our current efforts to allow for options is that our existing housing, we currently and for many years have had these policies to incentivize or make it possible for ADUs on, I believe, every single family lot could build an ADU for many years, and we've seen 29 built, right? So this is not something that is, it is possible currently in law, it is not being used. And so I think that's also important to point out. We're giving an option. It's not going to result in major changes based on everything we've seen, everything that we've seen in the region. The market will determine what ultimately is built. And so I think based on the community conversations and based on the fact that we do have so many people who, so many businesses who would like to make sure that their employees don't have to travel long distances based on wanting to have seniors be able to age in place and downsize. Students return home from college. I mean, there's so many cases. I see this value in flexibility to allow for where it is appropriate, where it is possible, and where the homeowner does want to do this, giving them that flexibility, and then ultimately the market will decide. And what we've seen so far is that there is a incremental change, but it is on the order of 29 units over many years in a city of 40,000 people. Council President Walsh.
I remembered what I was going to say about the affordable housing. My concern with the affordable housing as the state has listed out is just the 60% of area median income at rental. I think based on the analysis that we've done within our city, that it's really hard for that to pencil out. And no? Yes? Yes. Okay. So I think, yes, I love the idea of saying we can get a developer to build 1 unit of affordable housing for every 3 units of market rate housing. I think based on our experience that that's very unlikely to happen just because it doesn't pencil out for the developer. And so one of the pieces I want to make sure PPC really takes into effect is that the Eco Northwest report that we had that talked about where affordability might make sense. I think that was mostly for larger apartments and things like that. But I don't want to go into this and say we should only have 4 units with affordable because that's going to get us affordable capital A housing, because we were basically told by developers and consultants that that isn't going to be cost effective for the developer. So if we're going to have an effective conversation about what would get us affordable housing with a 4-unit, with 3 units of market rate and 1 affordable, we may want to consider something that's different than the state suggested 60% rental, 80% purchase, because as it is written, based on what we have heard of our market, it seems like that's just going to say, don't build a 4th unit. And so I think there should be a pro and con conversation about, is getting a 4th smaller unit that would allow somebody to downsize, escape domestic violence, be, a teenager who wants to come back and teach preschoolers, is that unit that could be more lowercase affordable to them because it's smaller better to achieve than to have a regulation that says you can only build 2 units, or you can get to 4 if you can build affordable, but it's not really going to pencil out. So I don't know if that provides a lot of clarity, but I just want to make sure we're not making a decision because it sounds good on paper, even if what it really means in our development environment is that those 3rd and 4th units would never be built.
Councilmember Hall?
Just to say, I thought that was a really good point. But in terms of like requests for information for PPC, it would be great to go kind of deep on the affordability stuff there too, because that report was written for like X% of a unit, or X% of units in a building of hundreds, as opposed to 1 unit at 60% AMI. So I don't know what the differences are to like securing bank loans for like developing and stuff like that. Maybe it does pencil out for 1 unit at 60%. Maybe it's harder. I don't know. So maybe that's something we could also kind of look into and have PPC chew on. We're giving them a very hard homework assignment, guys. So.
I mean, there's a reason they call it a housing crisis. Yeah. It's a big issue. So, yeah.
On your last question for PPC, can you maybe, I'm not sure so are you looking for them to be provided with data on, can you articulate that
Well,
again? Thank you.
Did you understand what I'm saying? I guess I don't necessarily know. I wouldn't necessarily be able to say that just because it doesn't pencil out for a big developer to build X% of their units at 60% AMI. I couldn't necessarily definitively say that that would be the same for someone who'd like to build 4 units on their lot, and one of the units would be at 60% AMI. So maybe establishing some element of
I think what
certainty.
you're looking for is market feasibility of this policy. So that would be some sort of an economic analysis and, playing out some numbers and performance, but that can change. Interest rates can change, the cap rate. So it's not really hard. It can vary significantly. So we can work with Arch to come up with some sort of a market feasibility analysis to give to PPC, but I can't guarantee that we can, it's possible, and how variable it can be based on market conditions.
Thank you for that. I also think that Eco Northwest did look into current market feasibility, and there were a number of challenges with the existing code, and so I think a deeper level of affordability unlikely to. But I think there's some data that's already been done in that analysis, which we as a city commissioned for this purpose.
Yeah, we can certainly dig out some stuff to share with you on that. But I think the 60% is for rental. it's 80% for ownership. So I think that can also be, if someone is doing it as a development and wants to create 4 rental units, then they would just have to take rent 3 at market rate, and the 4th one would be, that's one scenario. The other one is they just build 3, sell them, keep the 4th one as a rental, because there can be multiple permutations and combinations of what someone might end up. We can give it a shot.
Okay, thank you. All right. I also, why I asked the question about the lot subdivision is because in our existing code, for as long as at least I've served on council, there is this possibility to divide up a lot and then put more units on that lot, and that is also not, in my understanding, taken advantage of very often. And so, these options do exist, but it seems to me like giving homeowners more ways to build these smaller units. That's where I'm coming from. Their existing flexibility does not seem to promote that, and the market, we don't know exactly what the market needs, but at the same time, it seems like more flexibility could get us some more options for our community. Okay, one of you will be recapping this to our council. So I will try to recap, and then perhaps you can let me know if I've missed anything, and go from there. Okay, so on the first one, I think that we do have an ask that the PPC specifically look into the impact of the affordability requirement by the state around the 60% rental and 80% ownership for the 4 units, and how that the market feasibility of that based on data that we have, including the Eco Northwest study. We also would like them to consider, I believe, 2 out of the 3 of us at least would like them to consider the allowance of 4 dwelling units on 1 lot to provide that additional flexibility and to have the public hearing on that. That sound right? And we can also explain that there was a robust conversation and there were many considerations that were discussed in our meeting. Okay, on the second one. Okay, second one, Councilmember Hall, I believe that you are in favor of maintain 1,000. Okay. Okay. I am in favor of allowing the 1,250. And I'm also fine with the administration's recommendation of making sure that it's smaller than the main unit. I think that's okay.
I have one piece that I was thinking about for the ADUs. For those 29 units, now that we have a sample size, can we get can PPC get a sense of what the square footage is on those? Because to me, that if they're almost all 1,000 square feet, that's indicative of, oh, maybe the 1,000 square feet is limiting. And so I think that might be useful information in considering that as an idea. And I think the other thing that we put or that we talked about with ADUs was flexibility, and then also disability was the other piece.
Okay. So on the second question, on the specific question about the 1,250 square feet, increasing the maximum, would you like that to be considered by PPC?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we would like the PBC to consider the 1,250 square foot maximum, as well as the additional considerations regarding disability and, yes, regarding disability. And, you know, and that's based on public comment around wanting to make sure that it could accommodate a caretaker and a person with a disability. All right. Okay. And then on the third one, we already mentioned a number of things regarding item number 1 and 2. Do we have any additional separate requirements or questions rather for PPC to consider? President Walsh.
Yeah, I know 2 other cities in the area, I believe Renton and, if I'm not mistaken, Kirkland, have pre-approved ADU plans. I've always been interested in that as a potential way to help streamline, but I know people have to fit it into their lots. They want it to look similar. So what I would love is, if it's possible, just to reach out to those cities and see if those pre-approved plans have been built or have been built in any substantial amount. Like, are they getting interest from the community, or are they sitting on the shelf? Because if we're looking at ways that we might, not incentivize, but create opportunity to build out ADUs in a more streamlined, cost-effective way for homeowners, whether that presents a viable option or whether it's just another pie-in-the-sky idea that we would spend a lot of money on and wouldn't get a lot of use. So that would be great.
Okay, so our additional consideration for PPC is the efficacy and impact of these plans that are available to community members for ADUs. Does that sound right? Okay. Councilmember Hall.
I had a couple other ones, if that's okay. And then first, just to touch one more time on ADUs, I think you had mentioned flexibility and kind of having that pro and con conversation around what would it look like to maintain the max of 1,000 square feet, but having a flexibility for use cases, but then also making sure to bring in, Chair Hunt, I thought you had a good comment earlier about sometimes that creates more complication, and complication is yet another barrier. So that sounds like a good kind of pro-con conversation to have there as well. A couple other things that came to mind. The utilities thing was like this huge red flag that stood out to me, and I sent you a question about that. So it sounds like Public Works is going to be working on that. Is there a kind of touch point ever in the future for kind of council to have a policy conversation around what can be changed in policy to address some of these questions around utilities? I'm assuming that's something that in the future, right? Or is it more administrative?
There's certainly an opportunity, and I think Public Works is doing a rate study that is going to come to council on some of this stuff, but you know, as the boundaries blur between an ADU and a duplex and a single family, and whether they need 3/4 meter or in 1-inch meter, and how does their utility billing, we're trying to parse through all of that. So, and talking to Public Works to see if any clarity in the code, which is in Title 13, needs to be made. But my understanding is there's a rate study under way, which you all will get a chance to weigh in on.
Thank you. The other thing that comes to mind is I thought there were good comments around kind of the value of maybe we should be thinking about the frontage requirement and impact fees thing again. I wasn't really thinking of it more as kind of this is yet another barrier to this housing type that we want to promote in our community, and that the state is saying we should be promoting in our community as well. I hadn't really thought deeply about what could this mean in the long term in terms of our ability to kind of have sustainable neighborhoods. And if I remember right, we couldn't necessarily assess impact fees or frontage improvement requirements on one without the other, right? Or I guess we could on single family without ADUs, but if we did something on ADUs, we would also then have to come back to single family housing requirements as well. Is that right?
Yeah, some of the requirements. So for like impact fees for ADUs, we could collect impact fees. It would just have to be 50% of the impact fees on a single family home. And for middle housing, if we so that requirement that single family units cannot be more restrictive than middle housing. So for frontage improvements, if you require it for middle housing, you would have to require it for single family.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the clarity there. Then I guess my thought would just be maybe EPC could kind of revisit that just with the lens of what does this mean for our future. And it still could be, I mean, my initial reaction would still be that this is kind of a barrier to the housing and it would be against kind of the intent of the original intent of the state legislation and trying to promote this housing in our community. But I think it's a good consideration for the commission to think about again and maybe double check the council's. That was the only other thing that I thought about.
The frontage improvements?
And impact fees.
Okay. Okay. Council President Walsh.
Yeah, I have a really hard time giving them direction to go back and talk about the frontage portion because they already had that conversation. And so unless we're presenting them with new information or a new way of addressing it, I don't know that would add to an already complex conversation.
I think that's fair. I think that's kind of why I framed it differently. Like the way they had talked about it was the way we had thought about it, which is this is a barrier. This is another barrier that we kind of see in the community or in the developer community around building these kinds of units. I didn't hear in the meeting when I watched it or when we had our initial conversation, didn't feel like kind of a heavy focus on what does this mean for the future in terms of creating kind of sustainable neighborhoods and having the sidewalks that we need and the infrastructure we need or whatever. So maybe this is an opportunity just to revisit that logic and say, okay, does it still hold the same water that we had when we were having this conversation around removing barriers? Seeing puzzled looks though, that might not making any sense.
I am probably looking puzzled. I guess I am thinking, what problem are we trying to solve, right? We do have a requirement by the state. And so one of the things is how do we make sure that we are addressing the requirements that the state has given us, factoring in community feedback and to the best of our abilities, to meet our community's needs within the law, right? And then I think the other thing is we do have, for me, we do have these long-standing strategies, including from the housing strategy work plan. So, saying there are a significant number of cost-burdened and severely cost-burdened households, allowing the market to build smaller forms of housing could address this need. So I think for me, that's the problem I'm trying to solve, not additionally these, how do we make sure that we have these, that we're also making frontage improvements. I also think the frontage improvements and the walkability, we're talking about single, the flexibility for individual houses to build an ADU, trying to also accommodate whole neighborhood walkability. I guess it doesn't seem like, at least from, I think why I'm puzzled by this is that it doesn't seem like it's addressing the question that I thought we're trying to address with the current policy.
Yeah, and I guess I would say in addition to that, if you're bringing the question back in, if you're opening up a different can of worms, which says if we're going to require that for these middle housing units, you'd also have to require it for single family. And that would be a big change, not something that we currently have a community conversation going on for, or a, staff availability to really handle that type of change. So I don't mind putting a pin in the idea of should we have a conversation about frontage improvement requirements for development. I don't know if this is the right avenue necessarily to have that. I think what we heard from PPC was we agree that middle housing should be treated like single-family housing, and that if we put a requirement of frontage, it would make it more difficult to build, and one of our goals is to have this be more buildable. So I think, again, I'm not seeing an additional conversation that wasn't necessarily had, because you'd have to take it back to single family, which I think is somewhat out of the scope.
No, I think that's fair about the scope too, and kind of addressing the original question. This is still something that's on my mind. I mean, just in terms of, are we really accounting for the full impacts of this policy analysis with the original question too? So I don't know. Maybe this can be captured with a single sentence in the memo or something that goes to PPC, but I just really feel like this is something that maybe it's something, like you said, we put a pin in terms of a policy conversation to have at a future date, and maybe this isn't relevant to this particular conversation, but it is something that's weighing on my mind tonight.
Madam Chair.
City Administrator Belkowitz?
As I think was said on the dais this evening, this is a housing crisis. And so we are, I think, attempting to grapple with this on multiple levels, through the comprehensive plan, through community standards here in Issaquah, through state mandates. And so this is one piece of a pretty large puzzle. So certainly we appreciate the committee's feedback tonight, and that feedback will then be conveyed back to planning policy. The administration's recommendation is to try to keep the focus on these questions for the task at hand, recognizing this is just still one piece of this housing crisis that we're dealing with. So I think, with PD staff, I think we've gotten a lot from you, which we will convey back to planning policy. If the council final comments, great. Otherwise, I'd like to have staff at least have an opportunity to kind of say what next steps are before we part.
Yes, thank you so much. Council President, did you okay. I think that's great. I will just, one quick final comment is that I do really appreciate the administration bringing back some additional information, the graphics, the additional data options, because that was something that we asked about at our last meeting when we discussed this. And so I just wanted to, I think that set us up for this conversation, and I appreciate the additional thought that went into addressing our questions and making sure that we had the information for tonight.
So perhaps, Madam Chair, we can close by just kind of saying what we anticipate next steps would be, how this may or may not impact a February meeting of this committee.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So next steps, we're going to take all of the information that was provided tonight, and we're going to continue to work on proposed amendments. We're going to take that to the Planning Policy Commission, likely in the beginning of February, and then at that time they'll hold a public hearing and provide a formal recommendation to council, and then we'll have another discussion and we'll be looking for formal discussions for adoption. So that will likely come in May, once we get all the
Right,
So
thank
this
you.
committee will not see this item again for a little while. And Director Dollywell, I don't believe there are any pending matters for the committee in the month of February.
Any agenda items for February?
So we will keep in touch with Council President Walsh and Councilmember Hall. The meeting likely will be canceled. Just to let you know where this is going, and we will be back in a couple of months with this matter.
All right, thank you. And thank you for outlining the next steps and our Volunteer Planning Policy Commission's role, which is very important in the process. Right. Any additional thoughts by council? Not seeing any. Then we will move to announcements. Are there any announcements? All right, well, I will just mention, I have so enjoyed working with both of you. This is my last meeting as chair of this committee. And thank you for the conversations and for the conversation this evening. And best of luck as you grapple with these important issues on behalf of our community. It's in good hands. All right. With that, this meeting is adjourned at 8:25 p.m. Thank you all.